I'm not a person that's very overtly emotional in general. But that situation, I was so upset about it. I actually cried. I don't really cry at work. I don't really cry in general. But I cried, not because I was scared or anything like that, but I was so frustrated because I couldn't defend myself. I felt like I couldn't defend myself as a professional. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Listen In podcast. My name's Aravana.
My name is Anya.
And my name's Boomy.
Let's get into it.
On today's episode, we will be talking about professionalism, what we think it is, what it isn't, and managing conflicts in a professional way. We hope you enjoy the conversation.
What does professionalism mean to you?
At the very basic level, I do kind of feel like professionalism is about how you make other people feel whilst you're in that position of a professional. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
How you interact with them and the impact that has on them, sort of linked to their expectations of what you should be like. Which I know is kind of tricky ground because they might have some crazy expectation from you, which they shouldn't. But I think that there's basic levels of things like respect that people would expect from you, especially if you are in a certain position of being a professional, like a teacher or a doctor or a lawyer or whatever. And when they don't meet that basic expectation, you just think that doesn't feel right, or that doesn't fit the standard. That feels unprofessional.
Yeah. So let me ask you this question then. Do you think that everyone has the same expectations of people, the same level of making that judgment, I guess?
I don't think so, no. I don't. And that's why I think it's good that there are what I was introduced to later on through, training up to be a therapist or whatever job you train up to be. If it's a professional role, you are trained up in professional standards. And I think it is good to have those standards that we can all agree on, because you're right, like not everyone has the same ideas or standards of what a professional way of working is. And also, I guess also linked to things like culture and things like that, you're going to have different ideas of what a professional is. So,
Yeah, I agree with that actually, and I think we will delve into that a bit more in a second. But first, Bumi, what would you say your idea of professionalism is?
I just found a definition. So professionalism is the competence or skills expected of a professional. And I do agree with Aravna that obviously that's it can vary from role to role. It's just like you're saying that there might be certain expectations you might have, say, of a sales rep, that you may not have the same or the totally different expectation of a teacher or a doctor, if that makes sense. I think professionalism, there are transferable skills to all professions, but I also think that there are specific skills or competencies expected that are defined by each profession. So that's exactly what that is. The baseline is the ability to continue to develop your competence and your skills within that profession. What are your thoughts, Anya?
I think with professionalism, I think it really is about how you conduct yourself and how you come across to the people who you're working with. I think you are a representation of the company that you are working from. You're the face of it, really. And I think the way that you act and the way that you interact with other people, I think is all part of what makes you be professional. I wonder, is it easier for us to identify what is unprofessional?
Yeah, I think that's quite a funny one, because I think that a lot of times, is it unprofessional or is it just a different way of doing things? It's a very fine line. I don't want to sort of sign unprofessional behavior and just say you can act however you want if that's, who you are, and just be yourself and just do whatever wherever you are. Like, no, because there are standards. But I think it's just looking at what we've all agreed to as what is professional conduct in that situation. I think that it does change. There's certain places that you go and their sort of codes of conduct or their ideas of who they are as a team or a school or a hospital is quite different from another place. So some places I was, this is just a little example, but I was with a colleague that works with adults in the community, and with their team, they're quite, they dress quite casually, like it's not an issue. And it was summer, and I remember like with the team that I was in, it was quite formal, so you had to not necessarily wear a suit, but you have to be kind of formally dressed. And I remember she had flip-flops on, and I was like, I wish I could wear flip-flops right now, but I don't. If I wore flip-flops right now in clinic, it goes against the standards that they've set, so I can't actually do that. And in that setting, that would be me being unprofessional in my dress in that situation. But in her place, because of the way they work and the job that they do, they really don't mind if you wear flip-flops. I did find, when we were talking about definitions, I thought, let's see what the dictionary definition is. And it says that unprofessional is below or contrary to the standard expected in a particular profession. So it's just basically what we've just said of just, that in that profession, in that situation, this is what they expect. And it's if you go against that or below that standard, then that is what is unprofessional.
Yeah.
However, I think a lot of times sort of cultural things get mixed up, and cultural preferences or even class preferences and things like that get mixed up with that and get put up as that's professional, but actually it's just the preference of that culture or the preference of that class, or
yeah. And I think just thinking about actually when I was so before I started speech therapy, I was working in retail, and within that retail sector, there were certain standards of professionalism. Like I knew, for example, because I started working in makeup towards the end, I knew that my face had to be made up. I had to look good in terms of the look that was on my face. I knew that my uniform had to be, ironed and just presentable and ready. I could wear skirts, but they had to be, at a certain length, so like knee length. I also knew that, for example, some places I would have to wear heels or whatever. So there were certain things I knew that I had to wear and do. And even just my interaction, because I was working with customers, I knew that, for example, I had to speak to them in a respectful manner, and I had to be patient and understanding even when they're unhappy, and all of that, de-escalate, all of those things I learned that I had to do as part of that job. And then I think I started university and doing speech therapy, and we had a full-on lectures around professionalism. And I think it was at that point, it made me realize that professionalism is not just who you are for the shift. It's kind of who you are at work, and then also how you conduct yourself outside of work as well, in terms of, use of social media, also thinking about, just when you're out and about, because just in case you see clients, etc. It's just kind of, it made me a lot more aware. I feel like it took professionalism a lot deeper. And I don't know if that's because it's the nature of our job, where there's a greater pressure on professionalism. I don't know. Have you guys experienced anything similar?
Yeah, I think that, like you say, it does go deeper because we do have more responsibilities in there's not even more responsibilities. We have a lot more standards to follow. And if you don't follow those standards, you are at risk of, in our roles anyway, being struck off.
Yeah.
if you do something really, you know, against those standards. So you do need to be aware of it. And also because you're, like, for example, a standard that is across the NHS is something like confidentiality. So when I worked in retail, I think that retail is brilliant for teaching you professionalism
Definitely.
and interacting with people and just, you know, learning those sort of skills. It's amazing because people who work in shops, they get a lot of hassle and they manage it like pros. But anyways, I feel like, you know, in the NHS, one of our major things is confidentiality. And I feel like for us, they had to drum it into us because it's something that's quite easy to kind of let slip. You're just kind of having conversations with people and you'll just be like, oh, this happened at work, blah, blah, blah. You might kind of have that sort of conversation. But actually for me, that's something that does become unprofessional because you are dealing with somebody's personal life and their personal information, and they have not consented to you sharing it with whoever.
So I guess bearing in mind the fact that the transition from the jobs that he's working in before speech therapy to then working in speech therapy, and acknowledging that the level of professionalism kind of stepped up as soon as he worked with speech therapy. Did you find that shift, this question is to both of you, did you find that shift an easy shift to make, or did you struggle in certain areas?
That's it. I worked in retail before, so before uni, I worked in retail. But I think because I wanted to work within the health sector, I took up a job in care whilst I was at uni, and probably for the first year after graduation, whilst I was taking a break, resting my brain. But I think probably from being within the sector, it already made me to start thinking about confidentiality and obviously conducting myself in a certain way. But that's not to say that speech and language therapist stepped up a further notch for me, because just like you said, I'd heard scary stories. I think it was one of my placement educators who was sharing about someone who left a red folder, you know, where you can keep confidential stuff whilst you're transporting it to base. She left it in her car overnight by mistake or something, and someone happened to see it, and literally resulted in them being struck off.
I kind of feel like because I worked in retail for so long, I feel like it gave me a lot of training in terms of being professional in your interaction with people. But I think that what was a bit trickier was learning to manage things as a professional. Because I feel like I just felt more pressure to kind of let every single thing slide, or not stand my ground on certain things, or just being a bit like, obviously some of it's got to do with just starting in the profession and stuff like that, but feeling like I had to be quite timid, otherwise it's not professional. And then also other things, just in terms of, you know, like I've said before, you know, sometimes if you do stand up for yourself or try and labour a point, it's interpreted in a completely different way just because of stereotypes of Black women, etc. So I think it's those type of things that have been harder for me to navigate and learn what's professional, what's unprofessional, and just I think it's other people's and the culture's ideas of professionalism in terms of things like what you look like, how you dress, those sorts of things as well. That's been something to sort of learn to manage and get my own view on it as well, while staying within the realms of what's expected of me as a professional where I work.
Yeah, that's great. I think that really does tie into kind of the difficulty that I found transitioning, I guess, from working in retail to working in the health sector. In retail, as I said, you know, we did have certain guidelines, and we needed to look tidy and well presented. And I think that was just the baseline: tidy, well presented, and then the way you conduct yourself. But then working for the NHS, there were things that I really struggled with at first. One of the things was hair. Now, I used to have a lot of extensions, but I would I would mix up my hair a lot of the time. One day I'll have plaits, and then the next month I'll have, I don't know, straight hair, then I'll have curly hair, then I'll have short hair. I'll just mix it up. But then when I started working for the NHS, I then started to question styles before I did them. So I started, and I don't know if it's because I was, working and living outside of London where this wasn't a common thing. But for example, leaving my hair naturally as it is for work, which is afro in its natural state, I did not feel like I could do that at work. I was really worried, and I actually had a real kind of fear around that, around thinking, okay, can I show this side of me? And I know some people listening might just think, just why not? But I don't know. I just felt like if I had my hair straight in extensions, then I'll fit in and I'll be accepted.
Yeah.
I thought people would want to listen to me more because I look a certain way, and take on board my recommendations more because I look a certain way, which is deep. But then rather than being my natural self, having my natural hair and saying, well, this is me, and then going from there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whilst you were saying that, sorry, Rabna, whilst you're saying that, Anya, it got me thinking actually that also, I think there are elements of professionalism that are culturally defined. For example, in Nigeria, most of the days you could come in a suit, but on a Friday they had a dress down kind of day. People could come in wearing much more cultural outfits like your Ankara, whatever else you want. So I think also there are elements, because it got me thinking, and I know that I've discussed this in terms of hair and dressing a certain way. One of my friends was suggesting like, oh, actually, because I've got all these lovely African prints, that's what Ankara is, African prints, that I could, she said, oh, why don't you make skirts or trousers out of them and wear them to work? And in my mind, because I live within this culture, it sounds like it would be so unacceptable, if that makes sense. Whereas if I bought something, probably the same colors or the same prints from Primark, it will probably be a bit more acceptable than actually one that I made because it's African. Does that make sense? Because it's African print. So it's just little things like that, that actually there are elements of that, like especially the way you look, that probably much more culturally defined as well. There's certain cultures that probably, because people can be a bit more blunt and direct in how they respond, that would be acceptable. Whereas English people are generally much more polite. We say a lot of the pleases and the thank yous. Whereas some other people, if I tell you please a day, that's enough. Whereas we have to kind of punctuate every request with a please in the UK. So I think she's thinking about things like that, and including hair as well, for example. And we're talking about the headscarf, which is another thing in terms of looking professional. Apart from being culturally defined, can you also wear a headscarf as part of your everyday look?
Do you know what? I think before we get into that, I'm really interested by what you said about the Ankara material and wearing that. Because I know that in Ghana, Rabna, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I know in Ghana, they have their own material there, as well. And because I've been to quite a lot of weddings and things like that, and I see this material coming out at really nice events like weddings. It's a dress up material. It's something that you wear with pride to celebrate the occasion which is happening, and like kente for Ghana. But I just wonder, would you wear that to work here? Rabna, would you wear kente here?
I wouldn't wear kente to work just for practical reasons, like proper kente. I wouldn't. But me personally, I wouldn't have an issue with making a skirt with an African print, because it's just a pattern. For me, it's just a pattern, just like paisley is a pattern, checkers is a pattern, polka dots is a pattern. These ones are patterns too. I think the issue is that there are preconceptions on what is acceptable or not based on the society. So someone might actually, I think that's what we're sort of talking about as well, of there's nothing unprofessional about those patterns, unless, like, some of them, like for our ones, you know, it might have something written that, you know, you might not want certain words on the pattern or whatever, you know, fine. Or it might have something that you don't want to necessarily wear to work. But it's more, does this fit in with the code of where you're working, yes or no? But I think that whole thing of, can I wear as they say in Nigeria, Ankara print skirt or whatever to work? I think yes, you can, as long as it fits the standards. If your work has said that you have to wear a skirt, the skirts that you wear have to be below the knee, and you wear a skirt that's below the knee and it has a African print, why is that unprofessional? Or why is the check professional? To me, it's the same. It's more about how that person feels, and also how that culture, the dominant culture that they work in, responds to it as well. But in of itself, I don't think it's unprofessional.
I think that's the point that I'm making in terms of how the dominant culture might respond to it. Because like you said, there are certain things that are probably much more acceptable because they are a part of the dominant culture where we live. And when you wear that, I think sometimes, again, like we've already said, that there are things that we overthink about because we don't want to like start to tick off like certain check boxes. We just think it's best to avoid. But also, you also know that it might probably stir up a lot of conversation that you think, I would rather avoid just getting into this conversation about what I'm wearing and everything else that might come with it, that you probably just avoid. So I think it's also about, it goes both ways, that we can overthink things, but it's also what, I think it's also about the dominant culture probably opening up a bit of those criterias, making or letting people feel comfortable enough.
I think that things have changed a lot. So I remember at one point when I worked in retail, just going away from the NHS for a moment, and when we had to wear tights as part of the uniform, they always stipulated that you had to wear nude tights, and nude tights meant nude for white skin, not for my skin. So it just looks stupid, but people still had to wear this color that doesn't even match their skin because that was what was deemed professional. But people have questioned it since, and now, like, we've got so many different types of nudes now for different skin tones. So if that standard is nude color tights, that's fine, but it has to be a nude that, or what I would argue now is that, make sure that it's a nude that suits that person's skin tone, rather than just the nude that suits the main population's skin tone, and you're imposing it on that person and then telling them that they're unprofessional for not wearing the tights, when the tights that you're asking me to wear look ridiculous because they don't match my skin tone, you know? It's things like that. I know we've moved forward in terms of tights and that sort of thing, but that's like an example of something that I can think of that was still sort of around when I was working in retail. And I think it's changed a lot now. But I think that sometimes people will tell you that something is unprofessional in terms of how you look or how you dress, based on their perceptions. And it's just about really looking at it and being honest and thinking, for me now, does this match the standard I've been told that I need to follow? If it does, then that's fine. If it doesn't, then I need to think about it. Professional standard. But one thing that I think is important is that those standards are looked at, and they make sure that the standards aren't necessarily about culture. It is actually about the profession, and they're not penalizing people who aren't from that dominant culture for things that actually have nothing to do with. And then going back to hair, we know there's loads of, you know, research and stuff, and we know this ourselves from experience, but we do know that a lot of Black women would present themselves in a certain way in interviews and things. So even if they had their natural curly hair or whatever, or kinky hair, they would straighten it, or they would have a certain look, because anything else was considered unprofessional, or they wouldn't be shortlisted because they're not presenting themselves professionally. But then those people making that judgment need to step back and think, okay, this is actually just discrimination. It's got nothing to do with professionalism. It's discrimination.
Going through that period, and I could be wrong, but going through that period of like starting out in in the NHS and not wearing my hair naturally, I was worried that if I wore my hair naturally, people would feel like even more, because they felt it anyway. I could feel it from, from my work experience. But I feel like they would feel even more so that they can't relate to me because I'm different. Like, oh, she's got her hair natural, therefore she must be into this, she must be into that. I'll stand out more. So
Yeah.
and I know this is deep because it's a deep topic, but I just I felt like unless my hair was straight in a weave or whatever, or because I naturally don't have long hair, so I felt like if my hair was straight in a weave or something, extensions, then I would look more like someone that they could relate to. And I don't know if that's society. I don't know if this issue is broader. It comes from society, and it's more around people's perception or their desires of what they want their company to look like.
Yeah. I think it's a messy mix of everything. And I think that, binding a lot of that stuff together is discrimination. So that's why I think it's good that we've actually defined what is professional and what is not professional. And also, you as a worker, you need to also know what is professional and unprofessional in your field, and honestly look and see if you're doing that. Picking up the phone and being rude to someone down the phone is not professional. I'm not going to defend that. But someone coming in with their hair natural, I guess also depending on where you work, depending on that, it can be professional, it can be not professional. It depends on the situation. If you work in a theater, you have to put your hair back. You have to put these things on because it's part of your role. It's part of your job to make sure that these things are away in order to do your job. But something like coming in wearing an African print skirt, that for me, that's not unprofessional unless they've told you it needs to be, knee length, and you've come in a mini skirt. Then it's not actually about the African print. It's about the fact that you've come in a mini skirt, and that's not what the standard is for your profession. Do you know what I mean? But I think that there's loads of things in there that's to do with discrimination and also societal pressures and stuff like that. That gets called professionalism or unprofessionalism, but actually it's not. It's something else.
Point about African print earlier. Is it much more acceptable within this culture to go and buy something that's seemingly African print from a high street shop than actually one I've made myself?
Yeah, I think, do you know what? I think it probably is more acceptable. Not by like my standards, but as in I think just society standards. I think a lot more people would accept that rather than just the actual traditional material, which is a shame. It is a shame. And I wonder as well about, so we've spoken a bit about dressing inside of work, and it does really very much depend on the company that you're working for, because I think doctors as well, they have a certain dress code, like GPs, they have a certain dress code that they have to maintain as well. But outside of work then, so for example, say if you go on work-related training courses, do you feel that that in those environments you can then kind of wear what you want to wear and dress down if you want to dress down and all of that? Do you feel like you can bring that to those work-related training days?
I tend to a bit more. So like we can't wear jeans to work where I work at the moment. But if I'm not seeing any clients, if I'm not in the clinic space, if I'm going on a train or something, I wear my jeans. But I still try to look presentable and smart. I don't like dress completely down, but I tend to, in those sort of situations, I tend to wear things that I feel like I wouldn't be able to wear to like my main job when I'm interacting with patients, clients, whatever you want to call them. But yeah, I do think it's quite funny that in some ways, sometimes even with the dressing, I feel like I was saying to you, Anya, that sometimes I'll end up picking up how everybody else is dressing in the office as well. You end up like sort of, I guess, assimilating in that way.
Yeah.
Which is like, there's good and bad, you know, there's pros and cons, because you always learn different things from different people, and you might, you know, consider a certain style of skirt that you've never considered before. But yeah, I think it is quite interesting that that can change. Like, you notice that a lot of managers wear a certain type of you know, dress, or people who are working in this place dress in a certain way. It's really interesting. But I guess the bottom line is that it still meets the standards, but there are little cultures that develop that you end up trying to fit into.
What about you, Bime?
I would agree with the Rob. No, I'm the same. When I say I have an admin day, for example, or I'm going on a training, it's they're kind of days I look forward to, because although I think my workplace, we can wear black jeans, as long as we're not fully casual, you can wear black jeans. Whereas on a day where I'm going to training, I would still be casual smart, but I might just wear other things that I know that I can't wear into workplace normally. So that, I mean, there are days when I know that I'm fully admin, I'm in the office, I'm not going to like bump, I'm not going into patient areas, if that makes sense, that I could go in a pair of trainers. Do you find it's the same for you, Anya, as well, or different?
Do you know what? Like, I'm so like, so firstly, I'm a very fashionable person. I love my fashion. I love to like, well, I was gonna say I love to shop, but I'm not a shopaholic. But as in, I like to experiment with different styles and all of that. So that is just part of who I am. And so I think coming into this kind of working environment, initially I was a bit cautious about bringing that side of me to training days. I wasn't sure how much of that I can bring, because when I dress down, you know, I wear my trainers, wear like a nice top or whatever, but that's just who I am. And so I was really cautious about that initially, because I thought maybe I need to kind of meet them halfway. So maybe I don't go too casual, but I'm not too dressed up. I'm kind of in between. But I think as time's gone on, and as I've become more confident in myself and just in my role at work and things like that, I just wear what I want. So nowadays, if I want to wear trainers to training days, I'll wear trainers. If I want to wear my jeans, then I wear my jeans, you know, because I've noticed that other people do that, and I'm thinking, well, why am I holding that side of me back? So I feel like a lot more nowadays, I just wear what I want. Obviously, it's not like I'm going to come out in a tracksuit, but then I don't really wear tracksuits like that anyway, so it's absolutely fine.
See, like, what are your thoughts about wearing a headscarf to work? I know that the main culture, there's appropriation of headscarves with just religious beliefs, if that makes sense. But for some of us, a headscarf is just part of a look. It's a fashionable look, if that makes sense. So what are your thoughts in terms of wearing a headscarf as part of a professional look, whether to admin or training days at work, or even as part of your day-to-day look?
So I think definitely if it's for religious reasons, that's a completely separate thing, because I think that doesn't even come into the equation. But I think if it is that you're wearing headscarves because you're having a bad hair day, or you just like wearing headscarves outside of work and things like that, I mean, I don't really think there's a problem with it. But I do think it depends on how the headscarf is. This is my personal opinion now. I think it depends on the type of headscarf that you wear and how you wear it. Because you can have a really nice headscarf which is wrapped really beautifully, and it kind of fits in with your overall professional dress. But if it's just a head wrap which has just been thrown on, like the head wrap that you just wear around the house, then I think maybe you should have kept that at home. Personally, that's my opinion.
What do you think, Arabna?
Yeah, I think, you know, following on from Anya, just to clarify that we're not talking about religious headwear, because, you know, for a lot of people who are Black, we also wear a range of head coverings, hair scarves, and things like that for cultural and fashion reasons. I wouldn't wear a head wrap to work for fashion reasons. I just wouldn't. It doesn't feel like, for me, it doesn't feel like work. And yeah, I just feel like it would just, it's too much attention. Basically, I can't be bothered with that sort of, but I have seen lots of other, you know, girls who are not wearing a head wrap for a religious reason, but they're just wearing it for fashion, and they've done it so beautifully, and it looks really good. For me personally, I wouldn't for work. I don't think it's unprofessional, but I just don't think I don't feel comfortable wearing that to work.
Because I was just thinking about how it looks like headbands are becoming a bit more acceptable within certain roles, maybe, that actually you can put your hair in a bun but still use a headband. And it just got me thinking about headscarves as well. Like you rightly said, some Black people wear it for cultural and fashionable reasons. So I think my thoughts is just that, obviously, in terms of the main culture opening up certain criteria, or just being a bit more probably accepting or mindful of certain things. I'm not saying right suddenly, like saying right, dress out anyhow you want to work. That's not the idea. But there are certain days, for example, you know, that sometimes for a Black person, you have a whole day, you call it your hair day. Because it takes so much time to look after your hair. And after you've done it, you're like, oh, I don't really know what to do with my hair. And on that day, you wish you could wear a head wrap to work while still looking professional. But I guess that's the reason why I asked, because there are days where I wish I could wear a head wrap to work, and I just wanted to know what you guys' thoughts about wearing about that.
The thing is I have worn a headscarf to work, but this was because this was when I was transitioning from wearing my extensions to then going natural, and I wasn't confident enough to go natural, so I was actually wrapping my hair in a headscarf, and this is probably for like a week or so. And then I think I did it again after that, maybe once, but I used like a black scarf, plain black scarf, but it had sparkled a little bit, but it was black. And then I'd still wear my work dress, so it would just be like either a dress or a blouse and skirt. So I still felt I was dressed quite professionally, quite smart. And I styled it in a way that I thought was acceptable. I didn't come with like a multicolored headscarf. I didn't come with, do you know what I mean? Like I made sure that it still fit in with my look, basically, and what I was wearing. So yeah, I think we've spoken a lot about dress, about hair, and I think another thing which I want to just touch on very briefly, another thing that I struggled with a bit starting work was adapting my way of communicating. So that my communication style then became more professional. I think, again, when I was in retail, I did need to do that anyway, on a certain level. I did need to adapt my communication style, but I don't think it was to the extent that I then had to do once I started working. And it kind of made me think a bit about a term which is called code switching. And I know that a lot of people who are from the BAME communities, this is something that they might struggle with, particularly if you're living within London, because London, growing up, there's a lot of slang that's spoken in schools that you might use with your friends outside, or a lot of cultural slang, or even just switching between languages that you do so naturally if you speak another language. And that was something that I found quite difficult. Even though I'd lived here my whole life, I still found that kind of code switching quite difficult initially. I think as the years have gone on, it's got a bit easier. But I just wanted to find out from the two of you, whether this is something that you experienced as well.
Yeah, I'll definitely say that it's something that I've experienced, because it's so interesting that you mentioned this, Anya, because so you can imagine just having a conversation with your friend and you see someone that you know from a completely different like phase of your life. So probably like someone you know from work, and the way you just switch how you talk. It's just like your brain's just picked up, like, right, this is the time to sound a bit more proper, because you just do. Yeah, and it's definitely that. It's definitely something I was called out on whilst I was at uni, in terms of how I spoke. And also I've heard people comment in terms of, because I know that I don't sound as soft spoken as both of you.
Really?
And I've heard someone, I don't sound as soft spoken as both of you. That is something I know, for sure. You both sound like really soft and really gentle, and I just sound like I'm shouting all the time. So, and I've heard someone like literally say to me, "You sound a bit aggressive." So I think like things like
that's where I have an issue, because actually I've been told the opposite, that I'm too softly spoken. That's how you talk. That's how you, like, that's your voice, you know.
Yeah.
This is the same sort of thing, coming back to the same point of for me, I have had to learn to be more professional in certain ways. So like the way that I write an email to, let's say, a consultant, I can't just be like, hey, you know, I can't be casual, because there's a certain you know, etiquette to it, because I don't know you. I'm interacting with you as a professional, so there's a certain etiquette. When I have a bit more of a relationship with people, it's kind of like what people say about like smiley faces and XXX in emails and stuff like that. With certain colleagues, because we're close, like we will just be like, hey, blah, 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 XXX, smiley face. But I don't do that with everybody else, because obviously it's not really acceptable. It doesn't come across professional. It doesn't come across as your sort of respecting that person in that way. I think the thing about the voice, because there's lots of people from different cultures and backgrounds who just are louder. There are some people that are loud, like there's nothing they can do about it, that's their voice. And there's some people who are softly spoken and that's their voice. Like I think I've been told that I'm quite softly spoken. I don't think I am, but I'm not going to like put my vocal folds at risk for somebody else, you know. So yeah, I think it's one of those things where people, you know, everyone needs to think about, is this thing that you're criticizing, is it actually something that's unprofessional, or is it a preference, or is it just about the cultural norms and things like that?
I guess what I was leaning more towards is the fact that actually code switching for all of us can take on different forms. So it could either be in the way we talk, so probably change our accent when we're with friends, change the choice of words that we use when we're with friends, writing text message in a certain way, and then obviously writing your emails to a consultant. In fact, the way you probably send an email to a consultant and how you send an email to a parent, they're all completely different. So I guess my point is that code switching happens for all of us differently, and there are some things that are more culturally acceptable, especially within the main culture that we live in. There are certain things that are probably just more acceptable, or the norms that you just feel that you have to conform to, so that otherwise you're not coming across a certain way, if that makes sense. So I know that, for example, it's just that when I, like, if I'm calling a parent, naturally, because I've learned to, because I've been called out on it, my voice might not be exactly the same as I'm talking to both of you right now. It might sound slightly a bit more high pitched than the tone I'm using right now, but it's just things like that. So yeah, code switching takes on different forms for all of us, and yes, we do it.
And I think my main point really was that yes, we all do code switching. BAME and non-BAME people all do code switching, which is what you touched on, Bumi. And I think that is just part of knowing how to, I guess, be professional, if you want to call it that, and knowing the client group that you're working with. And again, like I said at the beginning, we are representing the organization that we work for. So I think there is a certain level of etiquette that we have to maintain as part of that. But I was more alluding to the fact that people from BAME origin can find that code switching more challenging than someone who is from a non-BAME background. And it's not everyone, but I do think that that's something I've personally experienced, being, like I said, brought up in an inner city area like London, where, you know, my accent, you know, lots of different things have, and then also my Caribbean roots, where there might be a word that comes to mind in Jamaican patois that I think, but I would obviously not say, but I would say with my friends outside or with my family. So I think there's a lot of code switching which happens. And I think that can make the transition to professionalism a bit more challenging. Okay, so then how do you guys feel about dealing with conflict at work professionally? Because that is something that can be, interesting. What do you think, Arabna?
That one's quite a tough one. I remember an incident I had at work with another professional. It was really bad, actually. This person, I would say, was very unprofessional and was shouting in my face and saying all sorts of things to me because I had offended them by something that I did without meaning to. I, you know, did something that that really annoyed them, so they ended up like in my face shouting, saying all sorts of things, including, "You think you're better than everyone? You swan in here, blah blah," just like that sort of thing.
Ridiculous.
Yeah, it was really bad. My manager had to get involved in everything, but that's a really big example of conflict. Obviously, that's like face-to-face conflict. And it was really difficult because I was being myself. I was confused why she was so angry. And I was trying to de-escalate it and find out why she was angry. But at the same time, I felt like I couldn't fully defend myself because I knew that I was a professional in that situation, and I didn't want to get in more trouble reacting to someone being very aggressive to me and very rude and all of this stuff. So it was really difficult in that situation, but I just had to try and like manage it. Somebody stepped in the end and like moved the lady away and stuff, and like I said, I had to go and tell my manager and stuff like that. But it made me really, really, really frustrated, that situation, and it really upset me. And yeah, it was bad. And then I think at the time, like when I was able to think about it later, I realized that you know, I'm not a person that's very overtly emotional in general. But that situation, I was so upset about it. I actually cried. I don't really cry at work. I don't really cry in general, but I cried not because I was scared or anything like that, but I was so frustrated because I couldn't defend myself. I felt like I couldn't defend myself as a professional because I was worried about my professional status and stuff like that. But now I think there's things that I learned about myself in that situation that I apply now so that it won't happen again. But I think now I would be fine to say, sorry, I'm not going to have you talk to me like this. I'm leaving. I don't need to take this. You know, there's things now that I know that I can do to step away so that somebody is not shouting in my face and accusing me of all sorts. You know, and I'm sure, you know, if this same woman was on the line, she'll have something to say about me as well. I don't feel, I mean, you always feel that you're the innocent party, don't you? But I don't feel that I did anything to deserve that level of venom and whatever else. But yeah, it was really difficult. And I think that actually the sort of things that helped me to learn how to manage and be more professional, quote unquote, in those situations is stuff like training, some of the trainings that they do at work about conflict resolution. And also, I have to say, and I have to give them props, like my manager was there for me, my supervisor defended me, like they were there for me in that situation, and that really helped. And they helped me to see that I wasn't being unprofessional, because they were able, I think a lot of the stuff that we've talked about, it's all true and it's all experience, but I think in that situation, which is, you know, to put it in a colloquial way, it was basically a fight, not a physical one, verbal one. They were able to dissect that situation and see this was not professional. This person coming up in your face was not professional. This thing that you did wasn't the most professional way to respond, but it happened because of this and that. So they're able to dissect things, and I was able to learn and stuff like that. And I think that that's what's important, to really be able to, I think that's why I was banging on about the tights thing, because I feel like sometimes people throw this word professional, this is professionalism, but really you're not talking about professionalism, you're talking about a cultural standard or something like that, which, you know, fair enough, there's different things that we have to join, but I think that there's other things. I think it's important for people to be able to really say, this situation, this behavior, these words are not professional because of X, Y, Z. And if any of that X, Y, Z has a sort of inkling of sort of discrimination and stuff, then I think we have to question whether that is actually unprofessional or professional or whatever.
I agree.
And that's my main thing, because I think that I think there's even research to show that certain things about the dominant culture in this country, the UK, I guess the white culture, white British culture, is automatically deemed as professional, especially middle class, automatically deemed as professional. So if you're not emulating that white middle class, and I guess in our profession, because we're mostly female way of acting and being, someone might say you're not being professional. But I would just like people to really think about it and think, is it actually unprofessional, or is it just to do with this norm of the culture that we've got used to? Because let's be honest, we all are unprofessional at certain times, and we need to learn about it. I can list several things, you know.
I think you've made a very good point there, and I think that is so important, what you said. And I just want to quickly go back to the question, which was around dealing with conflict. And you know, it's awful that you felt that you couldn't speak up in that situation because you wanted to adhere to those professional standards. And you know, I can very much relate to that as well. I've had lots of people shouting at me, and do you know what I mean? I've had it. Other professionals, parents, I've had it. So it hasn't been easy either. And I think there has also been times for me personally where I haven't spoken up about certain things because I've tried to kind of de-escalate the situation. I've tried to, you know, hold back, and you know, I'll be lying to say if I've completely sorted that now and I'm a pro at it, but I think it's something that I'm also working through in terms of knowing how to be forthcoming with my opinions, and also knowing how to say at the time, actually, no, I won't be spoken to like this. And there was a time I actually had to address something with someone who was actually in quite a senior position in their role, about the way that they had spoken to me in a previous meeting. I had to address it with them at the time. And I felt so much better for having done that, because I felt like actually I've got that off my chest, and hopefully next time they will think twice about coming to me on that type of level, because the way that they had behaved was very unprofessional, and I felt I had to call them out on it.
And that is professional, Anya.
Exactly.
You addressed it in a professional way. You weren't shouting at them, you weren't rude. You just said later on, when everyone had calmed down, this thing you did, I didn't appreciate it. Yeah, I think what I would say is that, you know, as we said in the beginning, or as we said, professionalism is a really big term, and it's a really big area, and there are different definitions depending on where you work, and it's important for you as an individual to know what professionalism means in your area and what it means like locally where you work, and to make sure that you do work to those standards for your own professional development. And you know, in our case, like we said, you can be struck off. but also it's important to also look at those professional standards and question them and see whether or not they are discriminatory, and if they are penalizing people for just being who they are. So for example, that example I gave about tights and the skin tone thing, it's a small example, but I think that there's certain things that are based on norms of a certain class, of a certain culture that is pasted on everybody, and you know, they try and say that that's professionalism, but actually I think, especially in the world that we live in today, we have to have a broader discussion on what actually is professionalism, what is acceptable behavior, what is acceptable speech, and is it acceptable because we've all agreed that it is, or is it just based on your culture and you not understanding other people very well? So I think basically there is a broader conversation to be had, and I think we all need to look at it together and see what we can do to just have a level playing field for professionalism in the workplace.
I think that's really good, and I think I definitely agree with the importance of finding out what is professional, what is deemed as professional in the area that you work in. I think that's so key. And I think one of the things which stood out to me in today's conversation was around the African material and the dress, and wondering whether that could be worn in a more professional environment. And you know, I'm from a Caribbean background, and I can't think of a particular dress that we would necessarily have as part of our culture. But I think as a wider kind of African culture, I think these things should be brought into the workplace a lot more. And I would challenge anyone. I mean, I guess it depends. It depends where you are working. Don't get me wrong. But I would challenge anyone, if your dress code is just professional, then I think I would challenge you to really have a go and maybe try wearing some of the cultural dress to work. Obviously, you don't have to go full out if you don't feel like that's appropriate with a full outfit, but I would encourage you to maybe just try, even if you just think, I'm going to wear it for the social that we have for Christmas do. But I think it's just important to still feel like you can bring some part of yourself to work in that way.
And still be professional.
Definitely. And the same for hair, you know, being able to be comfortable to wear your hair naturally and learn different ways of styling it if you're not confident yet. Just so that you feel that you can bring that side of yourself to work if you feel that you need to, rather than hiding behind, not saying that you are, but rather than feeling, if you felt like I did, that you need to hide behind extensions.
I think for me, definition that I found this morning actually struck a chord with me. That actually is more about the competence and the skills that I bring. Again, I have to live and I have to act within certain codes of conduct, but also there are other things that actually we can begin to question the status quo.
Thank you for listening in, everyone. We would love to hear your opinions and your views, because obviously this is a massive subject. So please leave comments. Let us know your experiences. Let us know your tips. Let us know your thoughts. And let's see if we can move forward in this area together. See you soon. Bye.